is Andy Brooks from the Association of Energy Affordability, or AEA. Before we get launched, I just want to let you know that we'll have participants on mute, and we'll want to encourage you to submit your questions in the chat box, and then we will be addressing the questions towards the end of the presentation. Also, the link to the recording of this webinar will be made available in a week or so. So let's get started. And you can, let's see, slide 2, please. Great. In this webinar, we're going to be covering, provide you with an overview of the LIWIP program that includes the project participation project, the property eligibility criteria, 2 project examples, and also we'll be covering the solar PV incentives, as well as how to participate in the program. Next. Now, the LIWIP program is a whole building performance-based program. It brings under a single program energy efficiency that includes solar thermal and solar PV to existing multifamily properties. The program aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so all measures that result in GHG reductions are eligible. There's 2 separate incentives. The energy efficiency incentive includes solar thermal, and it is based on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The solar PV incentives are based on the size of the PV system. Next. For this initial launch of the LIWIP program, there's a budget of $24 million for energy efficiency upgrades and solar installations. These funds are being administered by the state's Department of Community Services and Development, that is CSD. CSD selected the Association of Energy Affordability to implement the program statewide, and AEA is working with California Housing Partnership, TRC companies, and Greater Alternatives to implement the program. Now, the LIWIP program model consists of providing the property owner with a single point of contact throughout the project retrofit. And it also provides owners, I should say actually that there is no upfront cost to the property owner to participate other than their staff time and a small good faith deposit that ranges from $1,000 to $2,000 per property. And this good faith deposit is returned to the owner at completion of the program. The program provides a free energy audit and technical assistance. It also encourages and helps to facilitate leveraging other utility or programs as part of the rehab. Also, properties that participate in the program, that complete the program, receive a free WegoWise benchmarking account for the first year. And incentives in these programs are paid at completion of the installed measures. And it is also first come, first serve. Now, the steps to participate in the program include, first, for the property owner to complete the intake process with a CHPC or TRC. We set up an interest call with the property owner. We discuss the portfolio. We look into all eligible properties. We work with you to gather the information. Once we have that, we transfer that to AEA. AEA, in step 2, then provides free technical assistance to the property owner. They set up a technical call to gather additional property details and begin their preliminary savings and financial analysis that includes a scope of work. Step 3 is for the owner to then submit their intent to proceed with the good faith deposit. And this allows AEA to move forward with a full energy audit and thereby refine the proposed scope of work and the funding resources. Step 4 is for the property owner to reserve the financial incentives. In step 5, the property owner then moves forward with installing the upgrades, and this is using their own contractors. Once the project is completed, AEA goes out to the property to verify the installation and approves the payment to the incentive. And in step 6, the owner is able to claim their incentive, project incentive amount. Now, for properties that are eligible to participate in this program, the property must be located in a Cal EPA disadvantaged community. This is a requirement. At least one of the properties, one building in the property must contain 12 units or more, but there is a pathway for smaller properties or properties that have smaller buildings. So I would encourage you to, if you have any questions, please let us know about that, but there is a pathway for properties with smaller buildings. Now, at least 1/3 of the households in these buildings must be at or below 80% AMI. The program also requires that properties meet the minimum energy savings of 15%. Now, if the property is leveraging other resources such as tax credits or the Energy Upgrade California program, the energy savings minimum is 25%. Also, the incentive amount cannot exceed the net project cost, and owners are encouraged to participate with multiple properties, but there is a maximum of 500 units or 5 properties per owner or subsidiary of the one entity. However, CSD does have the discretion to waive this requirement depending on funding availability. This is the Cal EPA disadvantaged community map. For the property to be eligible, it must be in a red zone. I do encourage you to check all your properties to identify which ones are available. And again, the property must be in a DAC to be eligible for LIWIP. And now I'm going to hand it over to Andy.
Okay, hello everybody. Alex just confirming that you can hear me, which means they can hear me. Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. So again, this is Andy Brooks with AEA. I'll start off talking a little bit about the incentive levels. The first thing to note on this slide is that the dates are very key. So for projects that reserve by December 31st of this year, and most importantly, complete construction and the full verification and closeout process by April 30th of next year, 2017, those projects are eligible for $5,000 per metric ton of CO2. That's how the incentive is structured for measures that save energy for tenants. So again, it's $5,000 per metric ton for tenant energy savings measures and $4,000 per metric ton for owner energy savings measures. And again, that's for projects that finish by April 30th of next year. For projects that finish after that, the incentive steps down to $4,500 and $3,500 per metric ton. So we're definitely encouraging projects to enroll and kind of move along as quickly as possible so that we can complete this first program cycle and get as many projects in at that higher incentive level as possible. So I'll walk through a couple of quick example projects just to give you a general idea of what kind of scope we're looking at. So this is an example of a non-leveraged project. So this is just a kind of a standalone LIWIP project with no other rebates or incentives or tax credits in this case being brought in. So from left to right here you have the measure, the cost savings, the energy savings in kilowatt hours and therms, the percent savings per measure, the annual cost savings, and the greenhouse gas savings, which is what the incentives are based on, and then finally the measure level LIWIP incentive. So keep in mind that at the end of the day, the numbers that the program is really concerned with are the bottom line numbers, or those totals. So really we're concerned with the total cost, the total savings, and total incentive amount. So what that really means is that you may see something like what you have in that first line, where the incentive is actually higher than the measure cost. So if you look at that shower heads and aerators, the estimated cost is $5,000, but the LIWIP incentive is $13,000. So at the individual measure level, you could have measures that actually pay out more than they cost. But at the package of measure level, when you look at the entire scope of work, that will never actually happen. The cost will always exceed the total incentive amount. So you, as a project developer or owner, should really be viewing that excess rebate amount. In the case of this measure, it's roughly $8,000 as a way of helping to offset the cost of the more expensive measures that you'll need to include in your scope in order to achieve the total savings, the minimum savings threshold, which in this case for a standalone project, again, is 15%. So you can really view that $8,000 excess incentive for that shower heads and aerators as kind of helping to offset that $50,000 cost of the next measure, the common area LED upgrade, for which the LIWIP incentive is only $24,000. So it kind of, if you look at it that way, it really, that $24,000 incentive gets bumped up to $32,000 and is quite a good chunk of that common area LED upgrade. And kind of the same thing, you can look at the washing machine measures, the same thing. Relatively low cost, very high relative metric ton reduction there. So you get a high LIWIP incentive. And that excess of roughly $7,000 can be applied to the next measure, that $40,000 DHW boiler measure, to bring that incentive up to about 50% of the cost of that measure. So really, it's about coming up with a package of measures that works. And in this case, we've got a total cost of $100,000 for this scope and a LIWIP incentive of $64,000. So roughly 65% of the cost is covered by LIWIP alone. I should note that this is a scope that is comprised mostly of kind of low-hanging fruit type measures, lower cost, higher saving measures. Typically, what we're finding is the program at this incentive level it's pretty broad range in terms of what percentage of costs it will cover, from anywhere from 30% up to around 80%. And really, it depends on, of course, the vintage of the building, the vintage of the equipment, how much of an upgrade, how much opportunity there actually is at that particular building, and then, of course, what types of measures and what types of upgrades get included in the scope. So a couple things just to be aware of is, like, gas savings measures generally look better than electric savings measures from a greenhouse gas perspective. So the measure level rebate will look a little bit more attractive for gas saving measures. Same with if you have central systems in the building, they'll generally have a higher rebate relative to their costs than in-unit measures. So for example, central water heating is generally going to be a more attractive measure than individual water heaters within units. It's just relative to the cost. And things like switching to LEDs, or again shower heads and aerators, those kind of low cost measures are really going to help offset the cost of the other measures, things like windows that have very high costs relative to their greenhouse gas reductions. We got a little bit of clicking in the background, I get. All right, so this is another sample scope. This is kind of a preliminary desktop analysis of what could end up being a much more comprehensive project, and it also involves quite a bit of leverage dollars. So here you have roof insulation, in-unit common area, exterior lighting, unitary HVAC controls, domestic hot water boilers, low-flow fixtures, washing machines, refrigerators, and solar thermal as well. And you'll notice, again, solar thermal, a big gas-saving measure, and solar thermal is counted in this program as an energy efficiency measure. And so you'll see that that's a big chunk of the site savings. In this scope, you'll also notice we've got a total of 37% energy savings. So it's at this point, with this preliminary scope, well above the minimum threshold of 25%. Because again, you need 25% savings for leveraged projects. So you'll see things like that first line where the cost of increasing the roof insulation is very high relative to the greenhouse gas reductions that result in that, and therefore would likely be, maybe a measure that the owner may end up dropping from the scope. But we're going to include in our analysis basically all of the opportunities. But again, this is just a desktop analysis for a project that we've not actually yet been out to the site. And so we built the model and did our kind of preliminary calculations based on a plan set that they sent us. So that R19 that we're saying is in there. It's quite possibly when we get out to the site, it would not be unusual for us to find that, in fact, it was something less than R19. So a measure like that could end up looking, more attractive as we get further down the road. But so this scope also has a little bit more detail down below in terms of that summary section. So if we look at that summary section, you'll see the total project cost is $827,000. Now here, because we're doing solar thermal, there's going to be the CSI solar thermal rebate that's brought in, and that's a $20.19 per therm incentive. So that's another $141,000. And then we've got the Energy Upgrade California program also being brought in on this, which would be, this project is in SCE, SCG territory. They are offering $1,200 per unit at this savings level, so at 37%. It's about 12. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. That's at the 25% level. It's another $1,200 per unit. But again, that's contingent upon the scope remaining above 25%. Provided that it does, that's another $216,000 that would be brought to this project. Then you've got the federal investment tax credit, also to help offset that solar thermal cost. That's another $75,000. So, and then the LIWIP incentive, which in this case is $295,000. And you should note that in this example, this is actually a master metered project, which means all of the savings go to the owner, which means that the incentive is based on that lower $4,000 per metric ton rate as opposed to $5,000 per metric ton. And that makes a very big difference at the end of the day in terms of what that total number is. But in this case, we're looking at a LIWIP incentive of almost $300,000, which leaves roughly $100,000 out of pocket to the owner. And then going further down, so that's a big chunk. That's about 88% cost coverage there between all of those programs. And the aim for us is really to help facilitate as much as possible bringing those other funds to bear. In this case, we would be working directly with the Energy Upgrade California program to try to get as much of that done, that leveraging done kind of behind the scenes. You as the owner would still need to sign all of the appropriate documentation and fill out the forms that are relevant to that project, to that program, I'm sorry. But we will do most of the coordination with that program behind the scenes to make it easier for you to participate in both programs. So there below you see what that kind of summary, simple payback, pre-incentives is a 26-year long-term payback. We've got some high-cost measures in there. But after all of the incentives are brought to bear, it brings it down to a 3-year payback. So that's it on the sample scopes. Moving forward in terms of what measures are eligible, I'm not going to read, obviously, through all these measures. You can read through them on your own, but really what it comes down to is anything that results in GHG reductions is eligible under this program. So it's got quite a bit of flexibility in terms of measures. In terms of contractor selection, the owner is responsible for hiring their contractors directly. All of that is done, all contracting is done directly between the owner and the trades. You can choose from participating contractors. So we do have a list of contractors that have done an orientation with the program and have already kind of actively expressed interest in participating in the program and doing projects under this program. So we can provide you with recommendations or that list. But you can also work with your own contractors that have not yet participated or have not yet attended the webinars. If you do, you just have to put them in touch with us so that we can verify that they meet the program eligibility, the basic licensing eligibility. We also very highly encourage them to watch the recorded webinar, which is on the LIWIP website for contractor orientation. There is also a very brief contractor orientation form for them to fill out. It's a one-pager, I believe. The solar component of the program is also key. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And when we say solar in this context, I've already mentioned solar thermal, which is really under, in this context, under the umbrella of energy efficiency. Then we've also got the separate incentive structure for solar PV. So for PV, the program will also provide some free technical assistance. And that's done through grid alternatives, as Blanca mentioned earlier. We can have Grid Alternatives will provide a kind of high-level summary analysis during that initial desktop review that will give you a general idea of sizing, potential generation, rough cost estimate, savings estimate, kind of high-level summary of what is feasible. Then further down the road, if you do move forward in the program, you sign the intent to proceed form and we move on, they would dial that proposal in a little bit more, or dial that summary in a little bit more, give sizing, more details on sizing and shading, detailed cash flow analysis, owner purchase options, with PPAs put in there as well. And then from that point on, again, the owner is free to use whatever solar installer that they want. So while Grid can offer some free technical assistance to projects on the front end of the program, ultimately you are free to go out and get bids from anyone you want, and even use that initial assessment as kind of a benchmark, and work with whoever you want to do the actual install. In terms of the requirements for solar PV, you do have to first achieve 15% energy efficiency. So part of the scope, your efficiency scope must be 15% or more in order to access the PV incentives as well. The PV incentive structure itself is based on a variety of factors. So it looks at what the other leveraged sources are that are coming into that PV project. So if it is a tax credit project and PV is in the tax credit basis, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at whether it's getting the ITC, the investment tax credit, and whether it's receiving MASH rebates as well. So the more leveraged funds that come into the project, the lower the LIWIP incentive ends up being, the less we can contribute, because the project will just need less of our funds. If the next factor that dictates what the incentive level is whether that PV system is offsetting owner load or tenant load. So whether it's serving an owner meter or a tenant meter makes a big difference. And then the size of the PV system as well also factors in. So I can show you this next slide is really a basic matrix. This is just showing you what the dollar per watt incentive, and that's how it's structured on a dollar per watt basis, is. In this case, we're just showing systems that are less than 100 kW. So you'll see in that first row, if a project is receiving the federal investment tax credit and it's a 4% LIHTC project, then for systems that are serving owner loads, LIWIP can contribute 50 cents per watt. And for the portion of the system that is contributing to tenant offsets, we can contribute $1.50 per watt. And then you can see, if you skip down 4 rows from there, in the column where the project is not receiving any of those things, the ITC, LIHTC, or MASH, then the project can receive $1.50 a watt for owner systems and $3.50 a watt for tenant systems, which is very, very attractive. In terms of ownership structures for solar, it really is, the program is kind of indifferent towards that. If you're free to own to purchase the system outright. If you do, then you do have to enter into a 5-year operations and maintenance contract for the PV system, and the same applies also for the thermal system, solar thermal system. But PPA financing models are also fine as well. And then I think I'm going to hand this back to Blanca.
Yes, so we discussed that LIWIP is available for major rehab projects as well as standalone energy and solar PV projects. Now, I just wanted to point out a few things that are important when integrating LIWIP to a LIHTC major rehab project. The timing is important. We do encourage you to enroll your properties early on in the pre-development stage prior to developing the scope of work, and this is to take advantage of the technical assistance that the program provides to develop the energy efficiency scope of work and thereby inform the planning of your program. Also, if a project already has an existing energy audit, wherever possible, LIWIP will try to use that energy audit to qualify the program. And so we're, don't want to duplicate work. The other thing, so in a LIHTC project, in a LIHTC project, LIWIP will coordinate with your team. They're very familiar with the program. Also, the LIWIP incentive payment is paid at post-construction, similar to a utility incentive or a rebate. And LIWIP doesn't trigger any prevailing wages. However, please do notify AEA if you have other sources that do trigger prevailing wages. Next slide. Now I want to go over the intake process. So step one is to set up an interest call with CHPC or TRC to review your list of properties, go over in more detail the intake process. We do have 2 email addresses, one for nonprofit owners and one for for-profit owners. I also encourage you to go to the LIWIP flyer at the bottom left. There's a hyperlink under interest form, and that allows you to see what are the type of information that we are gathering at the intake process. The step 2 is to then compile the property information, complete the process with CHPC and TRC, and at this stage we're also requesting that you provide a copy of your tax credit regulatory agreement, and also any existing reports such as an energy audit or a physical needs assessment report if you have that, or information on solar incentives that the project may have. And at this stage we're interested in taking a look at all your eligible properties. So we don't need to limit ourselves to 5 properties at this stage. We're interested in taking a look at your full portfolio, and AEA can provide their technical assistance to help you prioritize the properties that are best fit for LIWIP. Once the projects complete the intake process, then they are transitioned to AEA to follow up with the technical assistance. Next slide. And I want to just point out here are 2 resources. This is the website link and the interest form. And again, this information is also available on the LIWIP flyer at the bottom left. Next slide. And this is the cover page of our the program website, and the interest form can also be found at the bottom right if you see what the square is to get started. I also want to point out that we have in the orange banner the last tab, Resources and Frequently Asked Questions. That includes a 6-page list of frequently asked questions. So I do encourage you to review that. If there are questions we don't discuss here, we may be covering them there. And that is the last slide for today. So I do want to open it up for questions.
Yeah, it seems like we've got a good chunk of time left for questions, and
Yes.
I think only Alex can see the questions, so
Okay.
you can read them to us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex.
Okay, so one just initial logistical question is, will there be a copy of the presentation made available for people to look at? So I know that the webinar itself will be recorded, but what about the PowerPoint itself? Will that be made available?
Yes.
Yes.
It's already available on the website. This is a slightly modified or updated version of that one. We're going to replace that one with this one probably later today. But yes, there's already a version of this available that has pretty much the same information.
Right, and I also want to point, also want to point out that you can go to the Resources and Frequently Asked Questions tab for the updated PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, great. One minor clarificatory question, I believe. So the standard minimum for units is 20, but it sounded like there was a sort of secondary minimum for waiver request. Was that 12 units?
Yeah, so let me clarify. So the program requires 20 units per building. But since the program has been launched, there's been a lot of input from owners who are interested in participating with smaller buildings. So there is a pathway for properties, you know, on a case-by-case basis for properties that are, let's say, 2 units to 19 units, right? So if that is a property that you're looking at and you're interested in enrolling, we're interested in taking a look at that. But it will be on a case-by-case basis.
And just for one further clarification on that is that if you have a property with multiple buildings on it and even one of the buildings has at least 20 units, then the entire property is eligible without any sort of waiver process. If you have a property that's multiple buildings and they all have buildings that are under 20 units, which is obviously something that we come across fairly frequently, that's again where the waiver process comes in. And the minimum for that is really 3 units and up. So from 3 units to 20 units, we can still serve it, but there's a waiver request process that has to go through first. And we can't necessarily serve it, but most likely we will still be able to serve it.
Okay, great. Another question just came in. So for projects that meet the 25% energy reduction requirement, since they're going through other programs and are getting other funding, but that are going to finish in the next few months, so projects that are, by the sounds of it, in progress but about to finish, is it possible to apply for LIWIP funding on those projects as well?
No, not if the project, if I'm understanding correctly, is kind of already in construction with a 25% scope. LIWIP can't come in and just add funds to that project, not without expanding the scope in some way, and probably a relatively appreciable way, which would be difficult for a project that's already in construction.
Okay. So there are no other written questions at this point. We could just unmute everyone and people could just ask questions verbally at this point, or people can always feel free to, or we can stick to this method and people can just enter questions into the question box manually. Do you guys
I think it's fine to unmute and just see.
I agree.
See what happens.
All right, so I'm going to unmute all of the attendees. If you're not going to ask a question, please mute the microphones on your end, but feel free to ask some questions. Oh, no, I think I have to unmute. I have to unmute everyone manually. Okay, this is going to take a second. Okay, here's one question that just came in. Someone asked if there will be more webinars again in the future on the same topic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. How soon will this program be available outside of the disadvantaged community boundary? Wait, not hearing much.
Sorry, I inadvertently muted the presenters who are now unmuted. So please answer that question, Andy or Blanca. Sorry about that.
Okay. The answer is, for the time being, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. For the time being, it will, as far as we know, it will continue to be just in the disadvantaged communities. There are some folks that are pushing to try to expand that somewhat, because we do have some buildings that literally fall right outside of the DAX and still meet the income eligibility requirements that we would like to be able to serve. But right now, the way that it is structured, the funding is structured, we really only can serve the properties that are in those disadvantaged communities, and there's no indication that that will change at this point.
Yeah, so I understand that's a political issue and outside the realm of what you're dealing with, but as a person whose county is quite disadvantaged for other reasons than air quality, it's outrageous that great programs like this are limited to people who happen to have bad air quality, but may or may not have other disadvantages.
Right. Yeah, we have no bearing on how those lines are drawn or how the disadvantaged community census tracts are built. But we'd like to be able to serve the whole state.
Hopefully, you'll pass it on.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we have one other written question that came in, which asks, can program funds be provided as a loan for the purposes of including the measure costs in basis for tax credits?
So I would say, yeah, my response to that is the program, what the owner can put, you can consider talking to your consultant, financial consultant, but one possibility is for the sponsor to include include a loan to the project for the amount of the LIWIP incentive. But LIWIP is not a loan or a grant. It is a utility incentive similar to a rebate.
Okay. Another question just came in. It asks, how will greenhouse gas savings be quantified in this program, i.e. energy modeling, Cal-E mod spreadsheets, etc.?
It is primarily energy modeling, and there are some custom spreadsheets for measures that are not easily modeled or can't be modeled in the software that we're using, but primarily it is based on modeled savings and calculated using engineering.
Okay. Just a reminder to everyone, please mute the phones on your end if possible when you're not speaking. I will probably be selectively muting people to avoid too much noise overlap, if at all possible. Okay. Another question just came in. This is actually Colin from CHPC. What is the sweet spot for the variety of building improvements and greenhouse gas reduction? Is there a certain package that tends to work best? Are there certain standalone improvements that work well together, i.e. aerators and boilers, shower heads and insulation, boiler and insulation and windows? It sounds like generally asking if there's some sort of like fixed sort of preset package to kind of bring to the table, or whether it will vary wildly between projects.
I wouldn't say that it would vary wildly between projects, but there isn't kind of a prototypical scope that will get you where you need to go. It really is customized on a building by building basis. That being said, there are certain measures that tend to be a good bang for the buck in terms of metric ton savings relative to cost. So like I mentioned earlier, the low-hanging fruit like shower heads and aerators and LEDs are going to be part of most scopes. But then also central equipment is a big one. So central domestic hot water is definitely a big one if the opportunity exists. And then as you can see in the scopes that I showed, solar thermal tends to be a very high saver. It doesn't necessarily, it's not always feasible or the best option for a given building, but it does have very high GHG reductions. So, I mean, basically, what we're going to be doing over the course of the next few weeks actually is putting together a sheet that shows a range of metric ton savings for specific measures, kind of common measures that we come across frequently, that we'll be able to give to owners on the front end even before we give their site-specific preliminary desktop analysis. Before we give them that, we'll even show them this, and this will give them kind of a general idea of what their opportunities are. Of course, it varies with the size of the building. Of course, it varies with the size of the equipment, but it will give you some kind of better idea, because I know that metric ton savings is kind of a nebulous number to most people. It's not something that they would be able to kind of figure out, oh, well, we think this is a relatively high saver, and thus the rebate will be X. So hopefully that will be helpful in that regard.
Okay. Another question. Oh, sorry, it just dropped down. Okay, so the project application final date is December 31st of 2016 with a completion date of April 30th, 2017. that seems like a very short time frame for project completion. So is the construction, is this based on the construction documentation phase or the actual construction phase? So if you applied
Actual
by
construction.
December 31st. Okay.
Yeah, so the project has to be not applied by December 31st. It has to be reserved by December 31st, and that is that date is kind of the somewhat arbitrary in that really if you're going to finish a project by April 30th, if you're going to complete construction by April 30th of 2017, you really would have had to have reserved earlier than that to have all your ducks in a row to get the construction done for most projects. So yes, we appreciate the fact that it's a very tight timeline. It's the timeline that we were given, and so we are pushing projects that can move quickly right now. So yeah, you've got about 10 months, and that April 30th is kind of a hard deadline for, again, not just completing construction, but also you need to leave time for us to come out and do our verification and close out. So that's a few weeks on top of that. So yep, tight timeline. That's what we're under. But again, that doesn't prevent projects that have longer timelines from coming in. It's just that those projects would come in under the slightly lower incentive level.
Okay. A question somewhat related to this. What exactly does it take to sort of meet the reservation? This is just a reiteration from earlier, I think, but maybe remind us all again of what it takes to meet the point where the project enters reservation and the incentive amount is set and reserved.
So at the incentive reservation, that's where you're agreeing upon your final scope of work and agreeing to the terms and conditions of the program. So there's a form that will have to be filled out called the incentive reservation and participation agreement form. And on that form, you will be confirming what your final agreed upon scope is. So again, this is after we've dialed in the numbers and done our full site visit and full audit and analysis. And we've discussed the scope and you've confirmed which measures you're going to move forward with. Then all of that gets signed off on in that incentive reservation and participation agreement form, and you sign the terms and conditions of the program, and then the incentive is reserved. And from that point on, you need to continually show progress with, the first step is showing the permits were pulled and showing that, you have documents, construction documents are being developed and other kind of milestones that you have to hit. I don't have this sheet in front of me, but there are milestones that you have to demonstrate progress on your project so that we know that the project is in fact moving forward at the rate that you agreed upon.
Okay. Another just minor clarifying question. So if a project is currently under construction, but the owner is willing to add to or enhance the scope, then they are allowed to apply for LIWIP funding?
Yeah, well, we would take that one on a case by case, and we would need more details about how far along in the project they actually are and what the current scope is, and we would have to see how much we would be able to expand the scope by. So that would be one. I would just encourage them to reach out to us directly, and we can discuss the specifics of the project.
Okay. Another minor clarifying question. Again, just reiterating, I can actually answer this one, I think, which is that this person asks, what if you have several projects that are 1 to 2 blocks away from the areas listed on the DAC maps? Might these qualify? And if I'm understanding that correctly, at this point, they do not qualify. It's possible that at some future point they will, but at this point in time, no, those projects don't qualify. Am I correct in that?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Another question is, combustion appliance safety testing required in this program? If so, is a 100% test out required?
Yes. It falls under it basically follows the same protocols for combustion appliance testing as all of the other whole building energy upgrade California programs follow. So yes, there is 100% test out, and that's only for, again, projects where kind of the pressure dynamics within the units are actually affected, and you've got combustion appliances that are at risk of failing.
Okay, there are no other questions at this point. Again, if anyone wants to ask a question verbally, feel free to ask. But you can always just type things in as well.
And our contact information, let's see, did we include it? I don't think we did.
It is, it's the email address.
Oh, yeah, you can reach out to.
Right, and you can also call CHPC or TRC. Our telephone numbers are found on the live web flyer at the bottom. If there's no question right now, I just want to point out one question that comes up when I am speaking to owners is that the energy savings requirement of 15%, you don't need to know if the property, what percentage, savings the property may have. That is actually where AEA can help you. So as long as the property meets the rest of the eligibility criteria that's located in a DAC, the size, and the affordability requirement, we can take a look at your projects, and AEA will evaluate the energy savings potential. So don't feel like you need to know up front that it meets the 15 or the 25% savings requirement. So it sounds like we don't have any more questions. Any last call for questions? I do want to mention that we will be compiling these questions and also incorporating a list of Q&As to make available along with the webinar. Andy, do you have any other points you want to make?
No, I think we covered it.
Great. So I do want to please encourage everyone to, once you receive the link for the webinar, to please share it with your colleagues in your office, share the flyer. It is important, to make people aware of this new program. It is going to be ongoing, and we want to, enroll all rehab projects that are eligible for this program as we move forward. And again, this program is available also for standalone projects. So that's another opportunity. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. And please look out for the link for the recorded version. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.